When your life is lived in public, relationships don't just belong to the people in them. They become content. Every conversation, every disagreement, every moment of joy or heartbreak gets interpreted, amplified, and archived by people who were never in the room. I've seen how quickly something personal can turn into a headline, a meme, or a debate thread. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to get it back. You're no longer just two people figuring things out. You're characters in a story everyone thinks they own. Over time, you start to understand the cost of that exposure. Public attention doesn't just observe relationships, it interferes with them. It creates pressure to perform, to explain, to defend. Small misunderstandings can look enormous under a spotlight, and private growth becomes public speculation. Even silence gets filled in by assumptions. That kind of environment doesn't encourage honesty or patience. It rewards drama and certainty, even when real life is neither. Someone stepping into a future relationship with me would likely understand that history and draw a very reasonable conclusion. Privacy isn't about hiding. It's about protecting what actually matters. It's about having space to be imperfect without it becoming permanent record. It's about choosing to learn from the past rather than repeating it louder. And that choice wouldn't be rejection of the world. It would be wisdom shaped by experience. Because when everything else is visible, the most valuable thing left is what you keep just for each other. Sometimes the smartest way forward is stepping out of the spotlight together. There's another layer to this that doesn't get talked about enough. It's the quiet erosion of identity that can happen when you're standing next to someone the world already thinks it understands. When attention is intense, people stop seeing the individual and start seeing a title, a role, or a projection. You're no longer introduced as yourself, you're introduced as the person with. And over time, that can feel like being slowly edited out of your own life. Someone who values privacy would likely recognize that risk immediately. Not because they lack confidence, but because they have a strong sense of who they are and don't want that flattened into a footnote. They may have their own ambitions, ideas, and creative instincts that don't need a spotlight to be valid. In fact, too much spotlight can distort them. When everything you do is filtered through someone else's fame, it becomes harder to tell where your voice ends and the noise begins. Privacy creates room for authenticity. It allows a partner to show up as a full person, not a symbol or an accessory. It means conversations don't have to be performative, opinions don't have to be strategically phrased, and choices don't have to be optimized for public approval. That space is where real partnership happens, not in front of cameras, but in moments where no one is watching and nothing needs to be proven. A future partner might choose privacy not to disappear, but to stay intact, to protect the parts of themselves that don't belong to the internet, the headlines, or the assumptions of strangers. Because being seen by the world is easy, being known as yourself is much rarer. And a relationship only works when both people are allowed to be fully real. There's also the human side of this, the part that doesn't show up in articles or comment sections. Constant visibility changes how your nervous system works. When you know that anything you say or do could be interpreted, reposted, or argued about by millions of people, your mind never fully powers down. You're always slightly on edge, even during moments that are supposed to be calm. That kind of background noise adds up over time. Someone who values privacy would probably understand that mental health isn't just about avoiding crisis, it's about preserving clarity, curiosity, and emotional range. Public attention tends to compress people into extremes. You're either praised or attacked, admired or misunderstood, often in the same hour. That's not a great environment for nuance, and it's even worse for vulnerability. Real relationships require space to be uncertain, to change your mind, to have a bad day without it becoming a narrative. Privacy acts like insulation. It softens the impact of the outside world, so what happens inside the relationship can stay human-sized. Disagreements don't need to be resolved under pressure. Feelings don't need to be justified to strangers. You get to respond instead of react. That's not about avoiding responsibility, it's about choosing sustainability over spectacle. A future partner might see that emotional well-being isn't something you optimize once, it's something you protect daily. And sometimes the most effective protection is simply fewer eyes, fewer opinions, fewer voices competing to define your experience. When life is already intense, peace becomes a strategic advantage. Because a relationship can only grow if the people in it are allowed to breathe. Then there's the question of family, which changes the equation entirely. When children are involved, privacy stops being a preference and starts becoming a responsibility. Kids don't choose visibility. They don't consent to speculation, screenshots, or strangers forming opinions about who they are before they even understand themselves. And once that exposure exists, it can't be undone. Someone thinking seriously about a future together would likely see that and draw a clear boundary, not out of fear, but out of care. A stable family life depends on predictability, safety, and trust, things that are hard to build when cameras and commentary are always nearby. Children need space to make mistakes, to grow awkwardly, to change their minds, all without an audience keeping score. They deserve a childhood that feels real, not documented. Privacy also protects the rhythm of family life. Ordinary moments, dinner conversations, inside jokes, quiet routines are what actually create connection. When those moments are preserved instead of broadcast, they become grounding. They teach kids that their value isn't tied to attention, and that love doesn't require applause. That's a lesson worth defending. A future partner might prioritize privacy because they understand that legacy isn't just about what you build in the world, it's about what you protect at home. Ambition can coexist with boundaries. Innovation doesn't require exposure, and strength doesn't come from putting everything on display. If you want a family to thrive, you don't put it under a microscope, you give it room to grow quietly and safely. Another reason privacy matters is because public life today isn't neutral, it's polarized. Everything gets sorted into sides almost instantly. Context disappears, nuance gets flattened, and suddenly complex ideas are reduced to labels. When you're close to someone who operates in that environment, you don't just observe the controversy, you inherit it. Even silence can be interpreted as a statement. A future partner might look at that landscape and decide they don't want to live inside the crossfire. Not because they're disengaged or indifferent, but because they understand how quickly public debate can turn personal. Opinions get assigned, motives get questioned, and before long, you're responding to arguments you never chose to join. That kind of pressure doesn't strengthen a relationship, it distracts from it. Privacy becomes a way to stay grounded when the outside world is loud. It allows a partner to opt out of being a symbol in someone else's argument, to avoid becoming collateral in conversations driven by outrage, algorithms, or tribal loyalty. There's a difference between standing for something and being constantly pulled into everything. A thoughtful person knows when to draw that line. It also preserves trust. When every action is scrutinized, people start to self-edit, not just publicly, but privately too. That's dangerous. Real connection requires honesty without fear of backlash. Privacy creates a buffer where disagreements can exist without becoming headlines, and support doesn't have to be performative. A future spouse might value privacy because they understand that not every battle is worth fighting in public, and not every belief needs a megaphone. Sometimes the most powerful choice is refusing to let noise define your life. You don't need to be everywhere to stand for something. You just need to know where you belong. There's a common assumption that influence only counts if it's visible. That if you're not posting, speaking, or positioning yourself publicly, you're somehow opting out of impact. But that's not how real power works. Some of the most important decisions, insights, and course corrections happen far away from cameras, driven by people who don't need recognition to matter. A future partner might understand that intuitively. They may see privacy not as retreat, but as leverage, the ability to think clearly, act deliberately, and contribute without distortion. When you're not performing for an audience, you're free to be honest. You can challenge ideas without worrying how it will be clipped. You can support without needing credit. You can influence outcomes quietly, where substance counts more than perception. Public attention has a way of simplifying people. Private influence allows complexity. It leaves room for patience, long-term thinking, and subtlety, qualities that don't trend well but change things deeply. A partner who values that isn't avoiding relevance, they're redefining it. They're choosing depth over volume, durability over applause. There's also something grounding about that choice. When one person in a relationship doesn't need the spotlight, it balances the weight of visibility. It creates an anchor, someone focused on what works, what lasts, and what's real when the noise fades. That kind of presence doesn't show up in headlines, but it shapes decisions in ways the public never sees. In a world that constantly equates loudness with leadership, choosing privacy can be a radical act of confidence. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need witnesses. And that kind of quiet certainty is rare, because real influence doesn't announce itself. It shows up when it matters most.